War. War never changes.
You some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 101, the Banana Wars. The Banana Wars were a series of U.S. military interventions across Central America and the Caribbean between 1898 and 1934. American troops, mostly Marines and sailors, went ashore again and again to protect business interests, secure trade routes, and keep governments friendly to Washington. These actions involved small but professional forces using modern rifles, machine guns, artillery, and later airplanes against local armies and guerrillas fighters armed with older weapons and relying on the jungles or mountains for cover. The fights were never huge, world wars, but they were tough, close battles full of ambushes, patrols through thick forests, and street fighting in rundown towns. Over time, the Marines learned new tactics for these small wars, and these lessons shaped the way the United States fought later conflicts. Here's some of the major interventions that went on during this period. And we'll start with Cuba, where American forces returned several times after the Spanish-American War. In 1906, when Cuban elections turned violent, President Teddy Roosevelt sent about 2,000 Marines. They landed at Havana and quickly spread out in small companies. The tactics were simple but effective. Occupy the capital, set up outposts along roads and railroads, and patrol on foot or horseback to stop riots as they cropped up. Local Cuban factions fought with old Spanish Mauser rifles and revolvers, but they were not organized into a single army. After a few months of guard duty and small skirmishes, calm returned and most of them left. Similar landings happened in 1912 when another political fight broke out. A few hundred Marines went ashore to guard sugar plantations and trained a small Cuban rural guard. Again, very little fighting, just patrols and standoffs. The biggest Cuban operation came during World War I. In 1917, sugar workers struck and rebels burned the fields. Washington sent the 1st and 2nd Marine Regiments, almost 3,000 men. They landed at several ports and moved inland in long columns. The Marines built small forts, ran motorized patrols with trucks, and used searchlights at night to watch for raiders. Spotting guerrillas. Cubans striking at night and melting back into the cane fields. The Americans responded with cordon and surge tactics. You surround a village at dawn, check every house, arrest anyone with a weapon. By 1922, the strikes ended. The Marines pulled out, and Cuba stayed quiet under leaders friendly to the United States. There was Panama in 1903, and this wasn't really a ground fight, more of a naval show of force. Colombian troops tried to cross the isthmus to crush a revolt by Panamanians who wanted independence. Keep in mind, Panama was part of Colombia until the United States basically created it. President Roosevelt sent warships, including the Nashville and Dixie, with 3- and 6-inch naval cannons. When Colombian soldiers tried to land at Colón, the American ships blocked the harbor and kept them from coming ashore. There was no big battle happening on land, and a few hundred Marines stood ready on docks with Springfield rifles, but they mostly guarded the newly carved-out canal zone. The tactic worked fine. The Colombians just turned around. Panama became independent, and the United States soon controlled the canal route. In 1904, more Marines arrived to protect American workers on the canal. They built up machine gun nests along the locks. But again, the main weapon was the threat of the Navy's big guns. Honduras saw many short interventions because American fruit companies owned huge banana plantations there. 1903, 1907, and 1911. Small groups of sailors and Marines, never more than a few hundred, landed from warships like the Denver, USS Denver. They moved quickly to guard railroad tracks and port warehouses. The tactic was pretty much the same. Show up, set a defensive perimeter, and warn local factions not to fight near American property. In 1911, the Americans even helped one side win a quick coup by landing at the capital and blocking rival troops. Local Honduran soldiers used old black powder rifles and machetes, and they rarely attacked the Marines directly. Instead, they tried to sabotage railroad tracks at night. The Americans responded with foot patrols that marched along the rails every dawn, rifles ready. By 1912, another landing followed the same pattern. 1919 and 1924, the numbers bumped up a little, almost up to 400 men, but the fighting stayed small. Marines would occupy a town for a few weeks, train a local police force with captured weapons, and then sail home once the government changed hands. Mexico's intervention at Veracruz in 1914 was different. Sharp, short, and bloody. On April 21, 1914, more than 3,000 American sailors and Marines poured ashore from 7 battleships and 2 cruisers. The first wave came in whaleboats from the USS Prairie. They rushed in to seize the docks, railroad station, and telegraph office. Mexican troops under General Gustavo Mas fought back with Mauser bolt-action rifles. Armed civilians and even prisoners released from jail joined the defense. Street fighting erupted by noon. Mexicans sniped from rooftops and built barricades with furniture and sandbags. American warships opened fire with 3-inch deck guns, blasting Mexican positions near the Naval Academy. The next morning, the full brigade, under Colonel Wendell Neville and later reinforced by Colonel Littleton Waller, advanced in parade ground formation at first, then switched to fire and maneuver tactics when the bullets flew. Sailors and Marines used Lewis machine guns to pin down defenders while rifle squads flanked them, a tactic we still use today, maybe with different guns. By midday on April 22nd, the city was in American hands. The fighting had killed 21 Americans and wounded another 74. Mexican losses reached at least 170 dead. For the next 7 months, the occupation force of 3,000 men patrolled the streets, set up roadblocks, and used early biplanes from the USS Mississippi for scouting. No big battles happened after the first day, but snipers remained a danger until the troops finally sailed home in November. The longest and toughest fights happened in Nicaragua. American Marines arrived in 1912 to stop a civil war. Admiral William Sutherland brought 750 Marines ashore. Major Smedley Butler led 350 of them from Panama. Their first job was guarding the railroad between the port of Corinto and the capital, Managua. When rebel forces ambushed a train at Masaya on September 19th, the Marines fought back with rifle fire and pushed through. On October 4th, Butler's 250 men, plus 600 more under Colonel Joseph Pendleton, attacked Coyotepe Hill. They used artillery to pound rebel positions all night, then charged at dawn with bayonets. The hill quickly fell. Rebel leader Benjamin Zeledon died in the fighting, and another force of 1,000 Blue Jackets captured the city of Lyon the same week. Total American strength peaked at about 2,300 men. After the main battles, most troops left, but 100 Marines stayed as a legation guard for years. The second and bloodier phase began in 1926. By early 1927, the Marines had grown to 2,000 men under General Logan Phelan. They landed at Bluefields and Corinto, seized the forts, and started training a new Nicaraguan National Guard. Then, Augusto Sandino, a liberal general, refused to disarm. He took 200 men in the mountains and soon led thousands of guerrillas. Estimates say up to 5,000 by 1930. Sandino's fighters carried captured Mauser rifles, old Winchesters, dynamite, and machetes. But they knew every trail in the hills and used the classic guerrilla tactics. Hit a patrol at dawn, steal their weapons, and disappear. The Marines answered with the first real use of air power in small wars for Americans. On February 26, 1927, an observation squadron flew in de Havilland BH-4 biplanes. These planes carried Lewis machine guns and small bombs. In July 1927, Sandino attacked the town of Octal with hundreds of men. Marines inside the fort held them off with rifle and machine gun fire. Then 5 DH-4s came overhead. The pilots dove straight at the rebels. The bombs and strafing runs killed scores of Sandino's men and broke the assault. After that, Marine aviators flew daily patrols, spotting guerrilla camps and calling in strikes. On the ground, Marine companies used cordon and search tactics again, now armed with BAR automatic rifles. They also built small outposts connected by radio and sent long-range patrols that marched for days through the jungle. Sandino's men countered with ambushes on the narrow trails and night attacks on isolated posts. One famous clash came at El Sauce, where guerrillas blew up a train and killed several Marines before fleeing. By 1932, American numbers had dropped to 745 men as the Great Depression hit home. Sandino kept hitting with hit-and-run raids, but the Marines and the new National Guard slowly wore his forces down. The last Marines sailed away on January 2, 1933. They left behind a trained local army and a new way of fighting guerrillas that mixed rifles, machine guns, and airplanes. Haiti saw one of the most stubborn resistances. In July 1915, 330 Marines from the USS Washington landed at Port-au-Prince after the president was killed. More regiments followed until 2,500 Marines held every major town. The enemy there was the Caco rebels, peasant fighters led by Rosalvo Bobo and later by Charlemagne Perlette. The Cacos used old rifles, mostly machetes, but they knew the mountains. They struck like ghosts, ambushing patrols and then vanishing. The Marines answered with 2 big campaigns. The First Caco War of 1915, they marched on Fort Riviere, a stone stronghold, and small units of 100 Marines climbed the steep hills under fire, used grenades and rifles to clear trenches, and finally stormed the fort with bayonets. Only a few Americans were wounded, and 200 Cacos died. After that, the Marines built roads using forced labor so trucks and armored cars could reach remote valleys faster. In the Second Caco War, 1918 to 1920,
Peralté raised up to 40,000 guerrillas. His men attacked Port-au-Prince twice. The Marines countered with night patrols of their own, machine gun ambushes, and early airplanes. Curtiss seaplanes here dropped bombs on rebel camps. In October of 1919, a Marine patrol tracked Peralté to his camp, shot him, and took his body back as proof. His successor, Benoît Bétraville, kept fighting until 1920, but the Marines' small unit tactics and superior firepower finally broke them. By 1934, only a few Marines remained to hand over control to the Haitian Guard. The Dominican Republic occupation followed a similar script, but with different terrain. In May 1916, 2 companies of Marines landed, soon joined by 7 more until 3,000 men held the country. Ships offshore added naval gunfire when needed, and later they brought the DH-4 biplanes with the Lewis guns. The first fights came quickly. At Puerto Plata on June 1st, 500 local troops loyal to General Desiderio Arias opened fire. 1 Marine captain died, the first Marine killed in that occupation. A month later at Las Trincheras, Dominican rebels dug trenches on 2 ridges. The Marines answered with artillery, then charged with bayonets behind machine gun fire. While 5 Marines fell, the ridges were taken. At Guayacanas, 800 Marines faced 80 entrenched rebels. The Marine machine guns cut them down in but minutes. Another sharp fight happened at San Francisco de Macorís when 12 Marines under Lieutenant Ernest Williams stormed a fort at night and captured 100 prisoners and lost only 8 wounded. After the open battles ended, the real war shifted east to the provinces of El Ceibo and San Pedro de Macorís. There, the guerrilla bands used black powder rifles, shotguns, and pistols. They cut telephone wires, ambushed patrols, but were never able to mass enough force to do real damage. The Marines trained a new Dominican National Guard and sent mixed patrols of Americans with the locals. They built roads so trucks could move up and down, set up outposts, and again used airplanes to spot the rebel camps. By 1922, the guerrillas were worn down. The Marines handed policing to the National Guard and sailed home in 1924. Across these wars, the United States forces followed a clear pattern. They landed from Navy ships using whaleboats or small streamers. The basic infantry weapon was the 1903 Springfield. Officers used the .45 pistol for close work. Machine guns gave them a huge edge. A single Lewis or Browning could stop dozens of attackers. Artillery came either from the ship's guns or light pieces hauled inland. And then, of course, the aircraft, the DH-4 bombers and the Vought Corsairs flew low, straight with the machine guns, and dropped small bombs, turning the sky into a weapon the guerrillas could do nothing about. Tactics evolved too. Early operations were simple occupations of ports and capitals. Later, the Marines learned the small war methods, long foot patrols that lived off the land, night marches to surround villages, and close teamwork between ground troops and pilots. They built up local forces, the Guardia in Nicaragua, the Gendarme in Haiti, the National Guard in the Dominican Republic, arming and training them with rifles so they could take over when the Americans left. The local fighters never had the same weapons or training. Most carried Mauser rifles brought from Europe years earlier. Some used single-shot guns or even machetes in the close fight. The greatest strength was the knowledge of the land. Thick jungles, steep mountains, and narrow trails really are more of a weapon than the machetes they carried. As guerrillas, strike fast, grab what they can, and run away. Leaders like Sandio in Nicaragua, Peralté in Haiti, and turned these hit-and-run attacks into national symbols of resistance, but they could never win a big battle. They made every patrol dangerous and every road costly to hold. By the early 1930s, the world had changed. The Great Depression made long occupations kind of expensive, and President Franklin Roosevelt promised a good neighbor policy, and no more sending Marines to Latin America. The last troops left Haiti in August of 1934. The Banana Wars ended, but the tactics that Marines had learned, jungle patrols, air support, and training local forces lived on.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.